As a student at a little college in a little town in rural Georgia, I played piano for a vocal group that traveled around performing at churches as ambassadors for the college. The church folk would feed us and put us up for the night in their homes. I was in the group for 3 years, and in my third and final year, my senior year, I became the student leader of that group. I also drove the van. That is how I met a freshman named Orville Mooney. Orville sang bass in the group. He was about 400 pounds of barrel-shaped fat that did not smile or make sudden movements, except for his darting eyes. Orville's head stayed still, but his eyes carefully, perpetually surveyed the scene, while his mouth formed an O, through which he sucked air, audibly. When the group was palling around, tossing around playful banter in a church parking lot, Orville was uneasy, and he never cracked a smile when we all laughed at a joke. People avoided him either because he didn't say much or because he was morbidly obese. I don't know. But I think mostly people avoided his unsmiling face, which could be interpreted as hostile or sad, or a combination of hostile and sad. Whatever it was, just as in nature, brightly colored snakes and frogs signal danger, Orville's sad, sour puss warned people to keep a safe distance and to not get involved. But I didn't heed that warning. It's completely shallow to judge a person by their weight. I aim to congratulate myself on my broad-mindedness and compassion and make a friend of Orville Mooney. And besides that, as the group leader, I couldn't avoid interacting with him. Making friends with Orville was surprisingly quick and easy. As soon as I paid him a little attention and asked for his opinion, his face softened and he took me in, figuratively and literally. The process was like endocytosis in biology, in which cells absorb external material by engulfing it with the cell membrane. Becoming Orville's friend was like being engulfed into a warm, fleshy cell that folds its membrane over me. Being unaccustomed to having a friend, Orville had not learned proper social distance. He was constantly by my side, sharing his body heat. When we sat in a church pew waiting to go up to perform, his soft rolls of fat touched me, and I moved away an inch or two, but it was still not enough to escape the reach of his warm, doughy flesh. If I moved any farther, it would appear that I'm retreating from him, and I didn't want to send an unfriendly signal. His friendship was suffocating, and whatever smell that was from the fragrant, oily stuff he had in his hair, it stays in my nostrils even to this day. I can smell it now. While Orville didn't join in the group banter, I found that he had his own special kind of bonding banter. And he had a catchphrase. Here's how I learned it. The college van had 2 3-person seats in the back and single drivers and passengers seats in the front. This was enough for the 8 people on our team. I was in the driver's seat, and Tanya, the alto of the group and fellow senior, called the front passenger seat. So, when we went to board the van, everyone could see immediately that the rear seats could each fit 3 ordinary-sized people, or 1 Orville. But no one said anything. It fell to me, the team leader, to make seating arrangements. We could comfortably sit 6 in the back and 2 in the front if Orville sat in the front passenger seat. So we stood outside the van, and I said, hey, Orville, how would you like to sit up in the front with me? Orville, of course, immediately saw my dishonesty because he'd been the subject of seating arrangements his whole life. So he came up close to me with his belly fully extended, nearly pinning me to the side of the van, in a mock-threatening posture with his mouth drawn down and eyes squinted. Orville said, Ned. He paused to allow me to fully focus on what he had to say next. He wanted to make sure it had full effect, so he paused. Are you trying to say I'm Hivy? Orville's face eased up. He was kidding, but he wasn't very good at kidding. And this was his idea of playful banter. Are you trying to say I'm Hivy? Orville was sharing something intimate with me. It was his catchphrase. It was his knockout comeback to anyone who would discriminate against him because he was obese. Are you trying to say I'm Hivy? What's the response supposed to be? Naturally, my first reaction was to be polite. Oh, no, I'm not trying to say that. Orville had learned this, are you trying to say I'm Hivy strategy, very early in his life from his parents who are themselves obese. They taught him to use his intimidating size to threaten anyone who might try to make him feel bad about himself by making themselves feel good about themselves for being polite. They taught Orville that he wasn't really fat or even heavy. He was big and strong. Orville's family knows that the world is whispering about them. That's because the world is full of self-righteous cowards hiding behind hypocritical decorum. As such, they deserve to be hit right where they're most vulnerable, and you know they can't hit back because they're polite, and they won't answer honestly. I met Orville's family once. Near the end of our itinerary, we were scheduled at a church near Orville's home in Macon County, North Carolina, right where the Chattooga River flows out of North Carolina and forms the boundary between Georgia and South Carolina. Now, naturally, since I was Orville's new best buddy, there was no question but that I would be staying the night at his family home. Not only was Orville bringing home his college friend, it was also his sister Mandy's birthday, and there would be cake, lots of cake, which made it all very festive. So after the church service, after the other 6 group members had been taken home by church folks, Orville was especially jolly and animated. His excitement made him jiggle more than usual. We climbed aboard the van, just us two, I in the driver's seat, he in the passenger seat. I started out driving along the Blue Ridge mountain roads, following Orville's directions. I did not want to meet Orville's family, and I had a knot in my stomach. I wished I could be staying the night in some stranger's house, or even sleeping in the van. I just didn't want to enter further into Orville's world like a smaller mass being pulled by the gravitational field of a larger mass doomed to orbit for eternity. Orville's happy mood made him open up. The sunset was brilliant pink and blue. Warm wind whistled in our open windows. Orville settled back in his seat and said, "Maybe when I get home I'll call Andrea, or maybe I'll call Franny, find out if they're still fighting over me." I leaned forward. both hands and elbows on the wheel, trying but failing to smile politely. I felt a pang of disgust that Orville would so obviously lie about girls fighting over him. But as he went on, I realized it was true, and I felt ashamed. Two girls, who were best friends, both liked Orville in high school, and he led both of them on. They started competing for his attention, and now they're sworn enemies. It's foolish arrogance, prejudice, to imagine that the heavy have none of the ordinary drama and joys and loves that non-heavy people have. I felt shallow for imagining that no girl would be interested in Orville. And I felt shallow for imagining that the girls are probably just as fat as he is. I felt shallow for being friendly only because I thought Orville had no friends. And I felt shallow for not wanting to go to his house. As Orville talked on, I began to think maybe there is redemption in going through the motions, even if your heart isn't in it. I congratulated myself for going this far. Just then, a deer leapt up over the guardrail and stood wide-eyed in front of the path of the van. And wham! Its brown hide smashed the window, and I jerked forward, pressing the brake all the way down. The van spun twice before the wheels left the pavement and dug into the soft shoulder, causing the van to flip lengthwise and roll down the embankment. Boom, boom, boom. My seatbelt kept me in the seat. But Orville hadn't fastened his seatbelt. It wasn't long enough for him. I can still see Orville's stupefied face in slow motion, his slack mouth and his wide eyes like a surprised heifer in a slaughterhouse. Orville slammed the passenger side, and then the driver's side, where I was strapped in. His blubbery mass was limp like a sneaker in a dryer, absorbing each collision without resistance. But his slow motion tumbling was nothing compared to my horror, seeing him, a 400-pound object, come at me at lightning speed. And he fell full force on my chest and knocked the breath out of me. Boom! He hit the other side. Boom! He landed on me again. Then the van came to rest at the bottom of a ditch about 10 feet below the road. Orville's 400 pounds, with its heat and moisture, literally suffocated me. I gasped for air, and my chest burned. Orville, get. I didn't have enough breath to say, Orville, get off me. Orville moaned, and as my consciousness drifted away, his moaning sounded like, are you trying to see I'm heavy? That's the last thing I remember of the accident. The next thing I saw was Orville, with his mom and dad and sister, all massive in size, crowding around my bed, squeezed into my small, white hospital room. Orville's mother said, oh, he's waking up. And that was the first thing I heard as my sedation began to wear off. I was on the verge of suffocation, and each breath I took inflamed my chest with excruciating pain. Orville had broken my ribs. I breathed shallowly. The Mooney family, each of them morbidly obese, stared at me as if I were being a poor host at this get-together. I could see in their fat faces that I was a bad driver, and damn lucky their boy didn't get hurt. And there was Orville, a 400-pound miracle boy, sucking air with his mouth, his eyes darting, looking like nothing ever happened, and in fact, like he agreed with his family that the whole thing was my fault. They all stood there looking at me like they were measuring out sympathy, applying it sparingly, lest they deliver more sympathy than I deserved. Yet my politeness habit was too strong. It made me try to smile, even though it hurt. My whole body hurt. Shortly, Mrs. Mooney pulled out a Tupperware container from a large shopping bag. "You didn't get to have cake for Mandy's birthday, so we saved you a piece," she declared hospitably. There was that southern tone that says, "I'm doing what's fittin'," like there's a code of proper fancy behavior for every occasion, and she knows it, chapter and verse. She held up the Tupperware and pulled off the cover to reveal a very large slice of yellow cake covered with too much chocolate frosting. "Orville, honey, pull up that table there now, will you?" She gestured to the rolling overbed table. "Mandy, you stand back there by Ned, and Daddy will take a picture." Orville rolled the table over while Daddy produced a disposable camera. This was in the 1980s. They had disposable cameras. And the four heavy people began to jiggle and jostle and shuffle into position. Mother Mooney leaned into the rolling table, which came close to my chest, causing me to gasp a startled breath, which caused such pain that I let out a loud cry. "Ah!" The Mooney family stood still and stared at me like deer staring at headlights. Was I trying to say they were heavy? My cry echoed out the door and down to the nurse's station. A large nurse appeared at the door. She was not Mooney large, but very large anyway. The scene of four obese people forcing on me a large piece of yellow cake with too much chocolate frosting didn't seem to strike her as unusual. She seemed more annoyed with my disturbance of the peace, crying out like that, causing a scene, getting ugly. I was, after all, a northerner, a Yankee, and this was a southern hospital. The nurse said, "Oh, what a beautiful piece of cake. Whose birthday is it?" As she squeezed through the herd of Moonies and injected something into my IV drip. I didn't feel it immediately, but I pretended to fall asleep immediately. After I closed my eyes, I never saw that slice of cake or Mr. and Mrs. and Mandy Mooney ever again. The singing group tour was over, so I didn't have a reason to see Orville again. I didn't make any effort to see him either. I was shown up for the dishonest hypocrite I was, and I got what I deserved. My so-called friendship with Orville was a sham, just something I tried to do to make myself feel like a good person. But if I really were a good person, I would have answered Orville's catchphrase question like this: "I'm not trying to say you're heavy. I am telling you plainly that you are very, very heavy. And when it's a problem, it's a problem. And the only one who can solve that problem is you." Being older and wiser now, I know that to be polite is merely to pretend not to see the obvious, so that everyone can feel better about themselves than they probably should feel.